Hello everyone, my name is Suman Mukherjee and I'll be talking about inflation in India, an analysis of its causes, the consequences, and the corrective measures we can take. First, for the very basics, we'll start with what is inflation. It is actually a sustained rise in the prices of goods and commodities, and this leads to a erosion of our purchasing power with our own money. Why does it matter? It is also called a silent tax because it does not appear directly on any of the account statements, but it constantly reduces your purchasing power and it affects the poor very disproportionately. In India, the very volatile items like fuel and food dominate a huge amount in our household budgets. And RBI, this is why RBI closely monitors the inflation for the economic stability. More than 40% of our household income is spent on food. And RBI tries to control inflation, but it sometimes during supply shocks, it can go up to 8%. Brief outlook on the India's inflationary journey. During 2009 to 13, the food inflation surged very high because of the supply side constraints. Again, during 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic brought supply chains to a halt, and which leads to the shortage of goods. And this leads to inflationary pressure. Then again, in 2022, the Russia-Ukraine conflict led to geopolitical tensions, which increased the global price of fuel and commodity prices. And we being one of the highest importers of crude oil, felt the pressure immediately. Again, during the time of US-Iran war, RBI tightly monitors the CPI inflation to a target band of 4 plus minus 2%. But we need to have a constant vigil on the inflation part. So what drives prices up? There are four causes. One is the demand pull inflation, which is when we have too much money to spend on too few goods, which is where demand outpaces supply and prices go up. Then is the increasing cost of input costs like the fuel, raw material, and logistics, which leads to higher production cost, and the businesses pass it on to the consumers. Supply chain inefficiencies also leads to increase in the prices, which happens because of poor storage facilities and inefficient transport, especially in the very vulnerable sectors like agriculture. We also have an imported inflation, which is where we import nearly 85% of our crude oil supply, and this was very evident during the Russia-Ukraine conflict. How do we control inflation? This can be done in four ways. One, the very obvious one, is the monetary policy checks by RBI. When RBI sees inflation going up, it increases repo rates. And this is where credit becomes very expensive and spending goes down, and also inflation remains in check. However, we have a trade-off of slower GDP growth due to increasing repo rate. Next is the supply chain upgrades. We can invest in cold storage in the rural areas, transports, and also the logistical infrastructure, which would reduce food price volatility caused by the wastage and distribution inefficiencies. Next is the energy independence. We should accelerate towards renewable sources of energy and reduce our dependency on crude oil as we move forward. Finally, is the fiscal discipline. We should have controlled government spending so that it reduces excessive demand in the economy. We should have a targeted subsidy for essential goods for vulnerable populations of our country. So, what are the barriers of our inflationary control? The key barriers include the political pressure to keep prices artificially low during or before elections. There is immense political pressure to keep the prices low when the prices are going up. So another thing is the global factors which are beyond India's direct control, which was evident during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine war, and also now due to the US-Iran war. Finally, structural inefficiencies in agriculture and logistics should be plugged in so that the gaps do not appear in those sensitive sectors. And we have a perpetual trade-off between growth and inflation control. If one goes up, the other goes down. So we have to maintain a balancing act. So control timelines include, in the short term, we can go for monetary policy tightening using the repo rate hikes. Next, in the medium term, we can go for supply chain infrastructure improvement, the cold storages where we keep foods, the roads, the ports, and the agricultural market needs reform. And finally, in the long term, for 5 to 10 years, we should have energy independence via renewables. Structural economic reforms and fiscal consolidation are a major and a vital part of all this. So, in conclusion, I would say inflation is an economic and social imperative. It is not just the rising of prices, it is actually the declining of purchasing power of money. If it is left unchecked, it will erode savings and reduce consumption and lead to destabilization of the economy. India has all the tools and institutions like RBI to manage the inflation effectively. Success also requires coordination between the monetary policy, the various departments, and infrastructure investments. Finally, controlling inflation is not just an economic priority, it's a social necessity. Thank you.